Today, we're talking about one of the most powerful inventions in human history. Seriously, it's an idea that has absolutely no basis in the physical world, but it shapes pretty much everything we do. We're talking about money. And what you're going to see is that this isn't really a story about gold coins or paper bills. It's a story about trust.
I mean, have you ever really stopped to think about that? It's kind of weird, right? You walk into a store, you hand over this little piece of paper or, just tap your phone on a screen, and in exchange, you get a real, actual loaf of bread that you can eat. What gives that paper or those digital bits any value at all? Well, the answer isn't physics, it's psychology.
And that right there is the key to this whole thing. Money is just a system of mutual trust. It's a shared story that we've all agreed to believe in, and we've been editing and perfecting that story for thousands of years. So how did we get here? How did we go from, say, trading chickens for shoes to a global system of instant digital payments? Well, let's start at the very beginning.
To really understand money, you have to imagine a world completely without it. Now, in really small early societies, things kind of worked on an honor system. I'd share my hunt with you today, knowing you'd do the same for me tomorrow. But as societies got bigger, you started dealing with strangers. And that's where you get direct trade, or what we call barter.
Now, barter seems simple enough on the surface, but it is wildly inefficient. And that's because of something economists have a fancy name for: the double coincidence of wants. It sounds complicated, but it's really not. All it means is that for a trade to work, I have to want what you have, and you have to want what I have at the exact same time. The chances of that happening are not great.
Let's look at this classic example. You've got a farmer. He's got a chicken, but he needs a new pair of shoes. Then you have the shoemaker. He's got shoes, but he doesn't need a chicken. He wants bread. See the problem? No trade. It's a dead end. And what if the shoes are only worth half a chicken? You can't just cut a chicken in half. So yeah, barter is clunky, it's awkward, and it basically puts a brake on any kind of economic growth. Humanity desperately needed a better system.
Okay, so barter was a mess. It was clear it wasn't going to work long term. So humanity comes up with its first huge breakthrough. People started thinking, what if, instead of trying to trade everything for everything else, we just all agreed to trust one single common object as a go-between?
And this is the birth of commodity money. The idea was to use a common item, something everyone agreed was useful and valuable, to act as the middleman in every single trade. Of course, it had to be something that was in demand, something that would last, and something you could, divide up easily.
And what's so cool is you can still see the ghosts of these early forms of money in our language today. For instance, Roman soldiers used to get part of their payment in salt, which was called a salarium. Sound familiar? That's where we get the word salary. Or how about the Latin word for cattle, pecus, which gives us pecuniary, a word that just means relating to money. People used everything from cowrie shells in Africa to cocoa beans for the Aztecs. Pretty clever solutions.
Still, these things weren't perfect. Salt dissolves, and it's not exactly easy to carry a cow around in your wallet. So eventually, people gravitated towards precious metals, gold and silver. They're rare, they're durable, they don't rust, and you can melt them down into any size. For a long time, people just traded raw chunks of metal, but this still created two major headaches for any merchant trying to do business.
Think about it. First, how do you know that lump of gold is actually pure, that it's not mixed with some cheaper metal? You don't. And second, for every single trade, you'd have to bust out a pair of scales to weigh the metal precisely. It was way better than barter, sure, but it was still a huge pain. And this hassle set the stage for one of the biggest innovations in the history of money. And it all went down in a small kingdom in what's now modern-day Turkey. It was called Lydia. And around 650 BCE, the Lydian king came up with a truly revolutionary idea that solved both problems at once. He decided that the government, the state, would be the one to guarantee the money's value.
And just like that, the coin was born. The king took chunks of metal, had them standardized to a precise weight and purity, and then stamped them with his royal seal. That stamp was basically a promise. It was the king saying, I personally guarantee this is what it says it is. And in that moment, trust shifted. You no longer had to trust the merchant you were trading with, you just had to trust the king's stamp. No more weighing, no more testing the metal, you just had to count the coins. And commerce absolutely exploded. So for the next 2,500 years, coins pretty much ruled the world. They fueled massive empires and connected the globe through trade. But as commerce got bigger and bigger, even coins started to become a problem.
Lugging around chests of gold and silver created a new set of issues, which led to the next great leap into abstraction.
Imagine you're a rich merchant. You want to make a huge purchase. That means you have to haul around these enormous, heavy chests full of gold coins. It was a logistical nightmare, and not to mention, you were a walking target for thieves. So humanity needed another solution. And this time, the breakthrough didn't come from Europe. It came from China.
Back around the 11th century in Song Dynasty China, merchants figured out a brilliant workaround. They started leaving their heavy coins with a trusted party for safekeeping, and instead, they just traded the paper receipts. Well, the government saw this and realized its potential, took over the whole system, and created the world's very first government-backed paper money. Each of these notes was literally a promise. It was a claim check you could take to the state bank at any time in exchange for a specific amount of real gold or silver. This was representative money.
Now, this idea of paper money backed by a physical commodity, what we came to know as the gold standard, it eventually spread all over the world and was the dominant system for centuries. But under the immense pressures of the 20th century, this old, rigid system started to show its cracks, and that pushed us into the final stage, into the purely abstract money that we use today.
The thing about the gold standard was, it put a hard limit on how much money a country could have. A government simply couldn't print more money to, say, stimulate the economy or fund a war unless it first got its hands on more gold. And that lack of flexibility became a massive problem for rapidly growing, complex, modern economies, especially during a crisis. And that brings us to one single, incredibly important year, 1971. This was the year that the U.S. president at the time, Richard Nixon, made a decision that completely changed the nature of money forever.
See, the U.S. was facing huge bills from the Vietnam War and social programs, and other countries were starting to get nervous and were cashing in their dollars for America's gold reserves. So Nixon made a dramatic move. He just cut the cord. He unilaterally announced that the U.S. dollar could no longer be exchanged for gold. And in that one instant, the dollar stopped being a claim check for a thing and became, well, just a dollar.
And that's the world we've been living in ever since. The dollar, the euro, the yen, pretty much every major currency became what's called fiat money. Fiat is just Latin for let it be done. So fiat money has value simply because the government says it does. It's not a claim check for gold anymore. It's a social convention. Its value comes entirely from our collective trust in the government that issues it.
And of course, the journey into abstraction didn't stop there. Think about it. Today, the vast majority of money isn't even coins or paper bills. It's just numbers in a bank's computer, ones and zeros flying around the globe at the speed of light. Money has finally completed its long journey from a physical object to a purely abstract idea.
When you look back at this whole story, you realize the history of money is really just the history of trust. We started by having to trust the specific person we were trading with. Then, we moved our trust to a useful object, like salt or shells. From there, we trusted a king's stamp on a piece of metal. Then, we trusted a paper promise for that metal. And now, today, our trust is placed directly in our institutions, in our governments. This entire, massive, complex global system that allows our whole civilization to function is built on nothing more than a shared story. We've watched that story evolve from a physical thing you could hold in your hand to pure, weightless data. And all of that leaves us with one last really big question to think about. What will be the next story we all agree to believe in?